Donald Trump gets his communications team in place and says he wants his finger to be on a more powerful nuclear button. This is Special Report. Welcome to Washington. I'm Shannon Bream in for Brett Baer. Donald Trump announced his communications team hours after he made headlines again via Twitter. One of Hillary Clinton's major lines of attack against Donald Trump during the campaign was that he lacked the temperament to have his finger on the nuclear button. Well, today, the president-elect tweeted that it's time for a major nuclear upgrade. Correspondent Peter Doocy has the latest tonight from West Palm Beach. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Shannon. The next White House press secretary, Sean Spicer, is a longtime ally of the next White House chief of staff, Reince Priebus, and he will be responsible for communicating with the public on behalf of a president who we saw again today doesn't always like it when people speak on his behalf.
It is time to drain the damn swamp.
The next president says one of his classic campaign lines isn't going anywhere. Tweeting, quote, "Someone incorrectly stated that the phrase drain the swamp was no longer being used by me. Actually, we will always be trying to DTS." Turns out that someone was one of Mr. Trump's top surrogates. Just yesterday, former House Speaker Newt Gingrich said this of the famous line about cleaning up D.C.
I'm told he now disclaims that.
Today, Gingrich recanted, tweeting, quote, "I goofed. Draining the swamp is in. At Real Donald Trump is going to do it, and the alligators should be worried. Hashtag DTS." And on the day Mr. Trump received his second consecutive presidential daily briefing, he also tweeted this, quote, "The United States must greatly strengthen and expand its nuclear capability until such time as the world comes to its senses regarding nukes." Mr. Trump was tweeting from Mar-a-Lago in Florida, and his daughter Ivanka headed that way from New York. She and her family were harassed by a passenger who disagrees with her father's politics. The passenger reportedly tweeted his intention to confront Ms. Trump and was so aggressive he was removed. JetBlue said in a statement, quote, "If the crew determines that a customer is causing conflict on the aircraft, the customer will be asked to deplane, especially if the crew feels the situation runs the risk of escalation during flight." So that flight manifest shrunk, but the Trump team grew today. In addition to naming longtime RNC operative Sean Spicer as press secretary, 3 other communications staffers from the campaign and transition, Hope Hicks, Jason Miller, and Dan Scavino, were given similar jobs at the White House. The president-elect is also forming a new White House National Trade Council and has asked the well-known China critic, Dr. Peter Navarro, to head it up, while giving Kellyanne Conway the title of counselor to the president, making her the highest-ranking woman in his White House.
And I think that when you have this opportunity, it's an honor, certainly, but it's also very humbling.
About a half an hour ago, the president-elect tweeted this, quote, "Based on the tremendous cost and cost overruns of the Lockheed Martin F-35, I have asked Boeing to price out a comparable F-18 Super Hornet." Remember, Mr. Trump met with the CEOs of Boeing and Lockheed Martin yesterday, said to reporters afterwards he thought he'd be able to get the cost of the F-35 down. So this is either him negotiating in public or moving on. Shannon?
All right, Peter. Well, a lot of tweets today. So how did the Trump team expand on the president-elect's tweet about wanting to expand the nuclear arsenal?
Something else we got late this afternoon from the transition office was a clarification. They say that when the president-elect talked about a desire to expand America's nuclear arsenal, he was just alluding or at least reminding people that there are threats out there from terrorists and rogue nations, and that the president does want to modernize the nuclear arsenal that America has. However, he only wants to do so to pursue peace through strength. Shannon?
All right, we will talk about that with the panel. Peter Doocy, thank you very much. In the final months of the election, Kellyanne Conway made a name for herself in the Trump campaign, spending a lot of time in front of the TV cameras and even getting parodied on Saturday Night Live. Now she's got a brand new White House role, and we're learning tonight more about her from correspondent Kristen Fisher.
Just in case anyone had any doubts if a mother of 4 young children would be able to find the time to also be counselor to the President of the United States, Kellyanne Conway made it very clear this morning that she believes she can do both jobs well, maybe even better than the men.
I would say that I don't play golf and I don't have a mistress, so I have a lot of time that a lot of these other men don't.
It's that kind of shock statement mixed in with her signature sweet delivery that made Conway an indispensable asset to President-elect Donald Trump. For a candidate who didn't like to play by the rules, she brought discipline as Mr. Trump's third campaign manager. For a billionaire notorious for not listening to his advisors, Mr. Trump seemed to listen to her more than most. And for a man who had major problems winning over women voters, Conway was a reassuring force, especially after the leak of that Access Hollywood tape.
I was there when Mr. Trump learned this, and exactly the contrition and the humility and the apology that he expressed is what I saw privately as well.
After becoming the first woman in history to manage a winning presidential campaign, she proved to be a formidable force on the transition team by openly stating her opposition multiple times to Mitt Romney as Secretary of State.
I'm all for party unity, but I'm not sure that we have to pay for that with the Secretary of State position.
Her new position will tap into her 2 decades of experience running a Republican polling and research company. She became a favorite for conservative candidates like Vice President-elect Mike Pence when he was running for governor, and at the beginning of 2016, Senator Ted Cruz. But she's having a harder time winning over her own kids on their impending move to Washington.
When you're a pollster and you have 75% agreement on anything, you're really excited. When you're a mother, 100% agreement would be fantastic.
Now, the 75% she was referring to was 3 of her children. The fourth, her 12-year-old daughter, is the lone holdout. Conway says that her daughter actually started a Keep the Conway Kids from Moving to D.C. online petition, and she already has over 200 signatures. Like mother, like daughter.
Yeah, we did a big move across the country when I was 12, too, and I know that it's a hard time.
It's tough, especially when you're around that age.
Yeah. All right, Kristen, thank you.
Thanks.
Well, questions persist about how Donald Trump will separate himself from his business empire once he becomes president. And as Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen reports, those questions also surround the people who surround Donald Trump.
There seems to be either a learning experience or an increasing sensitivity to, if not actual conflicts, the appearance of conflicts. And I think it's been heartening to see that development.
They need to set up arrangements where they either divest themselves of potential conflicts or put it into a blind trust.
This week, Eric Trump canceled an online auction for a chance to have coffee with his sister, Ivanka, that was raising money for St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital in Tennessee. He told the New York Times, "As unfortunate as it is, I understand the quagmire." Separately, the family withdrew their names from a fundraising appeal that was offering million-dollar donors a chance to share a hunting trip with Eric and Donald Trump Jr. and take a photograph with their father.
They're all going to do whatever they need to do under the law.
Senior Trump advisor Kellyanne Conway bristled when a CNN anchor likened the back and forth over the Trump charity to the allegations of pay for play that plagued the Clinton Foundation.
They were selling off $1 million trip to hunt with the boys and hang out with the president. That sounds like paying for access.
I don't know how they're the same. How that's the same as Bill Clinton giving $1 million speech in Russia and then Hillary Clinton, while Secretary of State, turning around and giving 20% of the U.S. uranium interests away. A little bit different.
With Politico reporting that the Trump family is considering a partial blind trust for the president-elect's holdings, some analysts do see parallels with the Clinton Foundation.
And while they may be a different situation, which is what the Trump people would argue, the optics are that it raises some of the similar issues.
And late today, according to published reports, Eric Trump went even further and announced that the Eric Trump Foundation is immediately suspending all operations, including fundraising of any kind. Over the last decade, it has raised close to $8 million for the St. Jude's facility in Memphis, which treats children with cancer. Shannon.
James Rosen, thank you very much. A House Intelligence Committee report says former National Security Agency contractor Edward Snowden is still in contact with Russian intelligence. Some see the report as a warning to President Obama against pardoning Snowden. Supporters consider Snowden an heroic whistleblower. They're pushing for a pardon. Snowden ended up in Russia after exposing classified U.S. government secrets. This is a Fox News alert tonight. A potential foreign policy nightmare for President Obama, President-elect Trump, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Correspondent Rich Edson is at the State Department to tell us all about it. Good evening, Rich.
Good evening, Shannon. In a major U.S. policy reversal, the Obama administration was going to abstain from voting against a resolution critical of Israel, breaking with the Israel position on this for quite some time here. This is all according to Reuters. Usually, the United States will protect Israel from these types of votes. This particular resolution would have demanded Israel halt settlement construction in East Jerusalem and elsewhere. An Associated Press reporter tweeted this morning Secretary of State John Kerry was planning to make a long-awaited statement on the Middle East peace stalemate at 11:30. That never happened after Egypt pulled the resolution and announced an indefinite delay in the vote. Reuters reports pressure from Israel and the potential to alienate the incoming Trump administration forced the delay. Despite the report, the State Department refuses to say how the U.S. would have voted.
We just don't preview our view in advance of votes inside the UN Security Council. We've been very clear about our position on settlements and the degree to which we don't find them to be constructive to the overall cause of peace.
Now, earlier this month, Secretary of State John Kerry says he cannot accept the notion that Israel's settlement are not a barrier to peace. And last night, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tweeted, quote, "The U.S. should veto the anti-Israel resolution at the UN Security Council on Thursday." The State Department says Kerry this morning discussed the resolution with Netanyahu. Officials refused to provide more detail on that conversation before the vote was postponed. Netanyahu again urged the United States to remain consistent. Now, had the U.S. let this vote move forward and had abstained from voting against this resolution, the United States would have broken with Israel and the incoming Trump administration. The president-elect himself tweeted last evening that the U.S. should reject this vote. Also, a Trump transition official tells us that the president-elect did speak with Egypt's president this morning about moving forward on a Middle East peace process. Of course, the president-elect might catch a little criticism there, and that the Obama administration is still occupying the White House. Back to you, Shannon.
Another thing we'll talk to the panel about. Rich Edson, live at the State Department. Thank you. And there's new video tonight of Monday's terrorist attack on a Christmas market in Berlin. That market has reopened. There is extra security, but there's no music or bright lights and little joy at the spot where 12 people were killed, dozens injured, including 2 Americans. The manhunt for the suspect continues tonight. Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent Greg Palcott has the very latest from the German capital. Hello, Greg.
Hi, Shannon. The latest we are getting is that dramatic new video, which appears to show that truck crashing into the Christmas market here Monday night. It is shot from the dash cam of a taxi cab pulling up nearby. The truck is seen moving from the left to right. The 40-mile-per-hour speed and the 25-ton size of the truck evident in the video. Shortly after it crashes, people are seen running from the market, literally for their lives. They were the lucky ones. One eyewitness told me today it took just 7 seconds for the truck to do its horrible damage. This as Berlin tried to get back to normal. Open for business tonight amid high security, the Christmas market in Berlin. That was the scene of Monday night's deadly truck attack. The search for the prime suspect, 24-year-old Tunisian Anas Amri, kicks into high gear. Officials confirmed his fingerprints were found on the cab of the truck that did the lethal damage.
We can inform you today that there is more evidence that this suspect was the perpetrator with high probability.
Authorities conducted raids Thursday in Berlin and Western Germany, both places where he had lived in recent months. And the hunt conducted not just in Germany, but Europe-wide. French borders tightened. A raid conducted in Denmark. This as more information emerges about the suspect. Before coming to Germany, he was jailed in Italy and committed crimes in Tunisia.
If he is watching me now, I just want to blame him for what he has done.
Months before the carnage, authorities reportedly heard the suspect say he was going to conduct an attack, but didn't have the evidence to hold him. Even U.S. authorities reportedly put him on a no-fly terror list after doing their own intel on the guy. As more criticized, German Chancellor Angela Merkel for her immigration policies may be adding to insecurity here. She said today she wasn't surprised by the attack.
We have been aware for a long time that we are also a target for Islamist terror, and still, when something like this terror attack happens, it is something completely different.
At the reopened Christmas market, there was an eerie quiet as people came out mostly to show they wouldn't be beaten.
Having it open right now, it's not just having feelings, but also for me it's a strong signal, it's a sign.
A sign of what?
That we are back on the road.
To show the terrorists that we stay strong.
We talked to another eyewitness today. He told me it was terrible that he saw the speeding truck smashing into bodies. But he was at his Christmas stall again today at work. Life goes on. Shannon.
Well, Greg Palcott with the latest from Berlin. Thank you. Let's get some perspective now on the German terror incident and how it affects Europe and the U.S. Steve Hilton is a former advisor to then British Prime Minister David Cameron. He joins us from New York. Steve, thank you for your time tonight. How do you think this will impact the conversation about the reality of the influx of millions of refugees throughout Europe? And just although people have very, charitable impulses, being able to protect people at the same time?
Well, Shannon, that's exactly right. Look, I have family in Germany, and I know that over the last year or so, when this problem has been building, on an individual human level, people in Germany have responded very compassionately. They have taken in refugees, they've looked after them, they've given to charity. But actually, when you look at it in terms of government policy, it's been a complete disaster. And it's been a disaster not just for Germany, but for the whole of Europe. And what it's pointed out, actually, is the flaw in the central idea, really, in the modern European Union, which is this notion of open borders. Because when Angela Merkel said to those refugees, come to Germany, you're welcome here, actually, she wasn't just doing that for Germany. She was creating an incentive for them to come all the way through Europe, because you can't just keep it in one country. And so that caused problems throughout the continent. And now you're seeing the political response to that throughout the continent, where people are saying, you know what, we've had enough of this system of centralized bureaucratic control that means that we as individual countries can't take the action that we think is necessary to protect our own security and our own long-term interests.
Yeah, and my understanding is that the suspect in the Berlin attack actually entered in through Italy, wound up in Germany, had sought asylum there. We've got some numbers on the top 6 European countries when it comes to asylum seekers, and Germany is clearly at the top of that list with over 360,000 people seeking asylum there. Italy is a distant second with less than 50,000. Is there an undoing of this? Is there a righting of this? We know that Chancellor Merkel is facing re-election next year, and sounds a little bit different tune than we heard from her before.
Well, it's very difficult to see the present leadership in Europe doing anything about it, because for them, the idea of open borders is sacrosanct. It is absolutely part of what the European Union is. So, for example, in the negotiations over Brexit, over the UK leaving the European Union, one of the arguments is, well, could the UK still have access to the single market, the economic benefits of the European Union, whilst controlling its borders? And basically the message is coming back from Germany, really the leading country in the EU. No, if you want to be in the EU, you have to accept open borders. So I think the only way this is actually going to change is through the political system, through electing new governments that actually have a different view. Now, actually, next year, there is the prospect of that, because in France, for example, you have Marine Le Pen doing very well there politically, who's basically said she's not just in favor of having a referendum on being in the EU, but actually, if elected, would begin the process of leaving. And so it is possible to see the whole unraveling of this institution that, until Brexit happened, I guess we all thought would be there forever.
And obviously there is an indirect impact ultimately on the U.S. as well. This is something the president-elect talked about endlessly on the campaign trail. And now he's getting new questions about what it means as far as his plans regarding people entering our country from other countries in certain places. Here's a bit of what he had to say yesterday when he was asked about the Berlin situation and his policies or proposals. Maybe a little bit tough for you to hear, but he was asked, has this caused you to rethink or reevaluate your plans to create a Muslim registry or ban Muslim immigration to the U.S.? He says, you've known my plans all along. I've been proven to be right, 100% correct. Your reaction?
Well, I think that, to me, that sounded very much like, if I may say, a pretty typical politician's answer, which Donald Trump, I'm sure, wouldn't like me saying, but it felt like that was not particularly committing to anything. I think that he can claim legitimately that he's been right in his characterization of the threat that we face from radical Islamic terrorism. That is true. But his plans have evolved during the course of the campaign. He started off very clearly indicating just over a year ago that there would be, he suggested banning all Muslims from entering the US, and that changed over the course of the campaign to this notion of extreme vetting. I didn't take what he said yesterday as confirming in any way the Muslim ban or the Muslim registry. I think it was just something that he said in order to just sort of keep the issue quiet until he's actually in office and can start to really implement his core plan, which I think is about extreme vetting.
All right, Steve Hilton, we've got to leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shannon.
The U.S. has taken out 28 al-Qaeda-affiliated terrorists in Yemen since late September. U.S. Central Command says the deaths came in 9 separate airstrikes in the Arabian Peninsula between September 23rd and December 13th. Syria says it has taken full control of Aleppo for the first time in 4 years. The last opposition fighters and civilians have been bussed out of war-ravaged eastern districts. It is the Assad regime's most significant victory against the uprising since the start of the civil war in 2011. Efforts to repeal North Carolina's controversial bathroom bill have failed. Republican lawmakers and incoming Democratic Governor Roy Cooper thought they had a deal to get rid of the measure, requiring transgender people to use the bathroom corresponding to the sex on their birth certificate. But the legislature was unable to come to an agreement. The next best chance for a vote will be when lawmakers reconvene in January. Well, one of Donald Trump's big campaign promises was to repeal and replace Obamacare. That may have just become a little harder after the release of the latest enrollment figures. Correspondent Kevin Corke is traveling with President Obama in Hawaii and takes a look at the numbers and the politics.
In a year of political surprises, there's one more left yet. Despite a looming change in the White House and a GOP-led Congress bent on its destruction, the Affordable Care Act just got what its backers would call a dose of good news. Enrollment in Obamacare actually went up by 7%, according to government figures. 6.4 million people signing up for Obamacare this year, an increase of 400,000 new enrollees over the same period a year ago.
Reports of Obamacare's death have been greatly exaggerated. This is something that's withstood 2 Supreme Court challenges, many different midterm and presidential elections, and a systematic strategy from Republicans to sabotage it.
The 5 states with the most people signing up for coverage at healthcare.gov during the latest enrollment period were from Florida, Texas, North Carolina, Georgia, and Pennsylvania. Ironically, all of them were carried in the election by President-elect Trump. Mr. Trump has made it abundantly clear what he thinks of the Affordable Care Act, at points calling it flawed, expensive, and saddled with triple-digit rate hikes in some states in 2017.
If we don't act, the damage will be irreversible. We're going to act. That is why we're going to repeal and replace Obamacare. We have no choice.
Trump says repeal, replace, and where possible, retain what's good.
When you replace it, are you going to make sure that people with preconditions...
Yes, because it happens to be one of the strongest assets.
You're going to keep that.
That and the provision that allows children to be covered by their parents until 26 years of age. Still, critics warn there's a big difference between criticizing and actually fixing the problem.
The challenge for the incoming administration is they need to find a way to stabilize the current situation, make sure people have access to health insurance, even under the ACA's basic structure, while they put in place something that would follow it.
For all the chest thumping, frankly, Shannon, that the administration would love to do about this latest enrollment number, do keep this in mind, from the massive premium increases to the relatively stagnant sign-up among younger, healthier Americans. It's you and me and the folks watching at home, the American taxpayers, who could be on the hook for billions more in Obamacare subsidies in 2017. All the more reason for lawmakers on the Hill and the White House to get to work. Shannon?
Nothing is free. Kevin Corke, thank you very much. Our series on the first 100 days of the Trump administration continues tonight with another of the president-elect's signature issues, keeping American jobs in America. Correspondent Phil Keating has the story tonight from Miami.
Outside the Indianapolis Rexnord plant in November, workers and supporters protested the company's plans to shut down its ball bearing and roller bearing operations and ship 300 jobs to a new plant in Mexico.
We're both losing our jobs, our careers. That you don't get much more than that in common.
Kelly Springer's worked here 43 years. Gary Cantor for 9. Both have kids and mortgages, and now uncertainty and a sense of betrayal.
Oh, definitely betrayal. I mean, it's tearing America apart little by little. The backbone of the country, you know. I mean, we built this place, the middle class, working men and women, and we're being dumped left and right, one after another.
The Mexican workers are going to make 8 cents less than I started at in 1973. I started at $3.08 an hour. They're going to pay them $3 an hour.
During the presidential campaign, Republican Donald Trump repeatedly hammered home his plan to reduce offshoring.
Establish tariffs to discourage companies from laying off their workers in order to relocate in other countries and ship their products back to the United States tax-free.
So did Democrat Bernie Sanders.
Our message to corporate America is that if they want us to buy their products, start manufacturing those products in California and in Vermont and America.
Trump suggests imposing a 35% tariff on American companies who move to another country and then sell their more cheaply made products back to U.S. buyers. Last month, President-elect Trump went to Carrier's furnace-making plant, heralding a deal made with the company to keep 740 jobs in Indiana, while at least 500 jobs still go to Mexico. That involves promising Carrier corporate tax reductions and millions of dollars in state tax breaks.
Companies are not going to leave the United States anymore without consequences. Not going to happen.
Earlier this year, Nabisco transferred 600 Oreo cookie-making jobs from Chicago to Mexico, triggering protests. Offshoring jobs for cheaper labor and costs, in its purest sense, is basic profit-boosting free market capitalism, and it's been going on for years. The Labor Department reports since the year 2000, the U.S. has lost 5 million manufacturing jobs, although partly due to automation.
We need our companies to understand that it's in their economic benefit to stay in the states.
Indiana Senator Joe Donnelly, a Democrat, is hopeful there can be bipartisan cooperation in the new Trump administration to get an End Offshoring Act passed in Congress.
This is not Democrat or Republican. This is American. This is about those folks not only in Indianapolis, but in Pittsburgh and in Johnstown and around this country who go to work every day, work really, really hard. Their companies do very, very well, and all we're asking is that the companies have as much of an investment in making the American promise come true as the workers do.
As for Rexnord, Trump tweeted this month, Rexnord of Indiana is moving to Mexico and rather viciously firing all of its 300 workers. This is happening all over our country, no more, giving Springer and Cantor hope that maybe their jobs too can still be saved.
I mean, he's made promises to us that this was going to go on no more, and we're going to hold him to that.
This will definitely be one of Trump's bigger challenges. He has promised to incentivize American companies not to leave through regulatory relief and business tax cuts. But compared to payroll, those are minor expenses for most companies. In Orlando, Phil Keating, Fox News.
Our 15-part series looking ahead to the first 100 days of the Trump presidency concludes tomorrow with a focus on childcare and elder care. You can watch all parts of the series on our show homepage, foxnews.com/special reports. Well, stocks were down again today. The Dow lost 23, the S&P 500 was off 4, NASDAQ dropped 24. Donald Trump makes some big additions to his team and says he wants better, more powerful nuclear weapons. We'll talk about the president-elect's approach when the panel joins me right after this break. And that was the president-elect way back in March, speaking at the AIPAC conference, and as part of being on the campaign trail. Sounded a lot like what he had to say today as well. So let's bring in our panel to talk about it. Steve Hayes, editor-in-chief of the Weekly Standard. A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics. Mercedes Schlapp, columnist for the Washington Times. And syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Charles, that sounded a lot like what we heard from him today, as this UN vote was potentially looming on this resolution that was going to essentially slap the wrist of Israel.
Oh, it would be more than a slap on the wrist. I think it would have done permanent damage to Israel, which is why even Obama himself several years ago vetoed the resolution, because it sets conditions that takes away all of Israel's bargaining chips. In other words, it gives everything over to the Palestinians in advance in return for nothing from the Palestinians, no recognition of a Jewish state, no concessions at all. And I think what happened today was very important. The reason is that had Obama done what it looks like he was going to do, which is to have the U.S. abstain, the resolution then passes, and it will never be reversed. Because in order to be reversed, you got to get Security Council to vote to reverse it, and the Chinese and the Russians would exercise a veto. So this would have been one last shot at Israel, and particularly at Israel's prime minister, from Obama. An act of kind of, I don't know if it's ideological, but a lot of personal revenge. And what Trump did was unprecedented. For a president-elect to step in, to publicly oppose it, and essentially to tell Egypt that introduced the resolution, you better withdraw this or you're not going to have a friend in the White House at a time when Egypt needs a friend in the White House. So it was extremely effective and extremely daring. You don't normally get that from a president-elect.
Mercedes, what do you make of that? Because as Charles said, there was the public and the private, with the president-elect reaching out to Egypt's president. They were the ones who were, promoting this resolution and passing it around. He's not waiting to be sworn in.
Well, I think it's the power of Trump's words. And I also, speaking to someone who was close to the negotiations at the United Nations, they were basically surprised that Egypt took this forward and pushed forward this resolution, that is speaking so strongly against the Muslim Brotherhood that President Sisi is involved in, and the fact that they would go against Israel in this critical time. But I think it does show, for the most part, that Israel is still remaining very vigilant. They're concerned that another resolution can come up before January 20th. And here's the deal. It's a new political order. They want to make sure that we're seeing more of a strong bilateral alliance between Israel and the United States, as opposed to the hostile relationship that we have seen between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Yeah, I mean, AB, had this moved forward, and the reports are, and we don't have this confirmed from the White House, that the U.S. was going to abstain from this vote. I mean, those would have been seismic results that would have moved forward. And you got to wonder how it would have impacted our relationship with Israel, although there will soon be a new administration.
Right, but obviously a lot of damage could have been done before he's sworn in. I'm not speaking at all about the policy. I'm not weighing in on the merits of the policy or what he did. But he is choosing when he can be about to be president and when he can sit back and say there's just one president. When you ask his aides and his spokespeople about Aleppo, about Russia's role in war crimes in Syria, their complicity in what is going on with Bashar al-Assad killing his people in this way, they say there's just one president at a time, and they choose to step back from any kind of specifics about ISIS policy, the way to handle the conflict in Syria. He's mentioned safe zones in passing, but then when it came to something like this, he felt he could flex his muscles. He went ahead and did it. I see how effective it is. And again, I'm not weighing in on the policy, but we have 30, how many days we have left. The guy still chooses when he can be president and when he can be president-elect.
And something else, Steve, that we got from him today, because he was very busy on Twitter. And he said today the United States must greatly strengthen and expand its nuclear capability until such time as the world comes to its senses regarding nukes. Now, we got a little follow-up because there were a lot of questions, obviously, after that tweet from Jason Miller, part of the new White House communications team. He said President-elect Trump was referring to the threat of nuclear proliferation and the critical need to prevent it, particularly to and among terrorist organizations and unstable and rogue regimes. He has also emphasized the need to improve and modernize our deterrent capability as a vital way to pursue peace through strength. Also, this comes on the heels, Steve, of us hearing today from Russian President Putin talking about coming up with systems to overcome deterrent systems and missile shield systems.
Yeah, there's a real risk to making policy 140 characters at a time. And we're seeing it. I mean, we don't know what the president meant. Did he mean more warheads? Did he mean going back to sort of 1980 style buildup? There's so many different ways you can interpret what President-elect Trump said there, and the transition team is having to come out and explain again and again and again what he actually did mean. My view is it's better to do it in the reverse. Now, that may be an anachronistic view. It may be the case that people love this because Donald Trump is getting out and he's going around the media. There's no question that if you take the totality of the kinds of things that Donald Trump has done, he's sending a message that he gets stuff done, right? I mean, if you think about the results here on Israel, if you think about Carrier, if you think about the meeting with Boeing, in which a Boeing executive came out later and said, we're going to lower the costs. Trump was out tweeting just a short time ago about new fighter jets and lowering the cost on those. I think for the American people, they're not likely to be very offended that Trump is not doing things the way that people in Washington have wanted them to be done for a long time. And that's a PR win. But we have to be mindful of the fact that there are consequences to making policy this way, and what might seem like a short-term political gain could have real long-term political consequences, particularly if the president-elect is sowing confusion among our allies.
I want to make sure that I read a little bit of what we heard from Putin today. He had a lot to say, Charles, in his speech today, but essentially the translation of what I was referring to, he said we need to enhance the combat capability of strategic nuclear forces, primarily by strengthening missile complexes that will be guaranteed to penetrate existing and future missile defense systems.
Well, the Russians have been obsessed with missile defense system since Reagan invented the idea in 1981, because they know that we are technologically advanced. They're only a superpower because they have nukes. Their economy produces nothing but oil, gas, and vodka, which is, you can't.
There are a lot of fans of all those different items.
Not exactly advanced products, and that's what makes them at our level. And they've always been afraid that the missile shield, that's why Reykjavik ended the way it did. Reagan would not accept a constraint on our missile defenses. So what he's saying is we're going to reassert ourselves by finding ways to penetrate American defenses. Now, that's why the Trump response is a little bit puzzling, because he's not talking about strengthening our defenses, which I think would make a lot more sense, but increasing our offensive capacity. Although, and you don't quite know why he said that, but nonetheless, I think it's salutary. What he's saying to the world and to our own foreign policy establishment is we are not going to adhere to all the beliefs and the myths of the last 50 years, which is that more nukes are bad, less nukes are good. That is not always true, and we're not going to be pursuing nuclear reduction agreements with the Russians in the hungry way Obama did, and ended up with little and perhaps making us worse off.
All right. That's it for this topic with the panel. But next up, how much power will Kellyanne Conway have in the Trump administration?
Well, that means I'm going to the West Wing to continue my service to President-elect Donald Trump and Vice President-elect Mike Pence, and I'm very excited. When you have this opportunity, it's an honor, certainly, but it's also very humbling, the gravity and the responsibility of serving at a senior level for the President of the United States. It's difficult to pass that up.
We are back with our panel to talk about some big moves in Trump world today. And Mercedes, Kellyanne Conway has got 4 young kids, as we all know, and she said she's going to be able to manage this because she doesn't play golf and doesn't have a mistress, I believe is what she said.
I find it so interesting, the double standard, that they won't ask the dad that they have 4 or 5 kids, but they will ask the mother if they have 4 or 5 kids and if can they manage the job. Kellyanne Conway is incredibly talented. She obviously has been committed to getting Donald Trump elected, a masterful communicator, and very much prepared to do this job. I think for Kellyanne it will be a key about basically setting boundaries and saying, this is the hours I'm going to work. I'll be on my phone. It's a wonderful thing about technology that you'll be able to be in contact. But I think it was key for Kellyanne to stay in the inner circle, to be part of, the Jared Reince, Bannon group, because I think that she will be allowed to shape the message and also be able to be part of the policy discussions to push through Donald Trump's agenda.
And we got more of the team today, AB. I mean, Sean Spicer, there's been a lot of speculation administration, he's officially going to be the White House press secretary. Hope Hicks, Jason Miller, and Dan Scavino, who were all part of the Trump machine moving into this victorious win. Spicer, of course, is at the RNC. So what does this say to you now? We're getting still this interesting mix of people that would be called quote-unquote establishment and people who play by a different set of rules that it seemed like it was the right combination for Trump to get to the White House.
Well, Sean and Reince Priebus they gave it all to help Donald Trump once he was the nominee. And basically, Sean Spicer became part of the team, was spending a lot more time in New York and really helping him over the finish line and through the transition. And the fact that Reince Priebus is chief of staff, is not as so surprising that Sean Spicer would be given another job, because he's grown in a relationship of trust with Donald Trump, and he and Reince are trusted now, and they've been very effective as a bridge to the rest of the party. Trump knows he's going to need that. So that's actually not a surprise. He's very able. And I think that the rest of the team, if you look at it, he continues to make picks that please people. I mean, he really doesn't, he has not gone off the reservation with his selections. For Kellyanne, I think she can be credited from August 13th to September 26th with totally turning that campaign around. She tempers his worst instincts of being impulsive, of being attracted to drama and chaos. She absolutely knows this electorate. She knows the daughter and the son-in-law very well, who are very important, but she knows a lot more about this process than they do. So I think that's really great news for them. If you actually look at the communication, a lot of people have the title of assistant to president. He abhors a chain of command. There's no chain of command. So not everyone is an assistant to the president, and then sort of no one is an assistant to the president. But I think it makes people feel good. They're all on board. People who've been there all along, and I think that there's going to be a small power center. I'm glad Kellyanne is in it.
Steve, do you think that these different camps are coalescing, that they're going to work well together? Do you think at some point there will be competing interests between what people on the outside think look like two very different teams?
Yeah, there are already competing interests. I mean, talk to people who are working on the transition, who are setting up this White House, and they will tell you that it's not actually just the factions that people might imagine, the sort of Steve Bannon faction on the one hand, Reince Priebus faction on the other, but there's this blending of faction, evolving rivalries inside the White House. And I think it's going to be very interesting, because it's going to make it interesting and challenging to cover this White House. I agree with AB and Mercedes on Kellyanne. I mean, she really distinguished herself throughout the campaign. I think she's one person who came out of the campaign looking better than just about everybody, and she will be a calming influence, I think, on President Trump. The communications team is interesting. I mean, this is going to be one of the most difficult jobs, I think, challenging jobs in this White House, is being part of that team. And it really reverses just what we were talking about in the last panel. When Donald Trump comes out and tweets something, the communications team is going to have to scramble to explain what it was the President of the United States just meant. And it used to be years ago that you had the policy teams fighting one another to get language into a presidential speech that would then become policy. The situation, it seems to me, reverses itself, where now you have the president sort of blurting something out on Twitter or wherever, and you're going to have these policy teams racing to the communications shop to try to get their word, get their language into these clarifications that we'll see.
Charles, do you think he continues to tweet the way he does now as president? I mean, he likes taking away that barrier, and people liked feeling like they had access to his thoughts and where he was coming from. It worked well for him. But does it work as president?
Well, whether it works or not, he's going to do it. He's going to be the president. There's no one to stop him. As you say, he likes doing it. He feels he goes around everybody who wants to stop him. He has a direct communication. It worked for him. And I really feel sorry for the people who are going to be on the communications team. They are going to get old very quickly. They're going to be very gray very quickly, because every week they're going to be, they're going to have a puzzling tweet like the one on the nukes. They're going to have to work on it. But I think I would agree, incidentally, that Kellyanne is a great choice. She showed it in the worst of times when they had the Access Hollywood tape. She was calm, very articulate. But the real hero here is her 12-year-old, who has gone online to get a petition up to prevent her having to move.
Yeah.
I think she ought to be appointed our trade negotiator with China.
Nothing's moving. No jobs, no factories, no 12-year-olds. No one's moving.
One tough girl.
Well, she's had a very strong role model in watching her mother. Thank you for watching Special Report. I'm Shannon Bream. Good night from Washington. Tucker Carlson tonight is up next.